All right. So now we get into the Gulf Blue Plague. And if you look on the description with today, this subject is Canaries in the Coal Mine, Gulf Blue Plague Warnings. And that's an article that I have been working on. It's the same title, Canaries in the Coal Mine, Gulf Blue Plague Warnings. I've been working on this for over 2 weeks, and it's just so much. I can't finish it. It's going to end up being multiple articles all over again. And maybe the timing is off. Other people have come out with other things going on with the Gulf, and I'll cover that first today. Let me start off with what came out on New Year's Day, or maybe it was New Year's Eve Day. Can't remember, but a certain group who claim that they're representing those of us in the Gulf came out with a video, and it's really gone ballistic. And it had one of the Gulf victims in Louisiana, somebody who is getting well known and has even been on mainstream or lamestream media, television and such, Kendra Arneson. And I want to play for you just a little bit of what she said during that video, because it ties in with what we had written before. And Lynn, go ahead and post the arsenic article on the chat room so people can see what I'm referring to. So let me play this partial audio out of the video clip that went ballistic. Last time I looked, it was like 48 or 50,000 hits, and that was yesterday. So, and it was supposed to be, by the way, about new information of what's going on with the Gulf of Mexico. Well, I'll discuss more of that. Go ahead and listen to this partial from that video. Listen to this audio of what she is talking about.
I've seen some of the cleanup workers down in Venice a couple of days ago. They had a rain out day, so they were all at the local store. They'd been working about a month straight, having a couple of beers, a bunch of guys, you know. And I went over there to get my oil changed. So I walked inside to talk to my neighborhood guys, you know, I know all of them, and Mr. Hart that owns the store. And a friend of mine said, "Kendra, look at my arms." And he was laughing about it because people trust the government and think that everything's okay. He's got brown spots all over his arms. So I thought, well, you know, I've never seen that before. And then as I turned around and I started looking, now my friend is in his mid-40s. So I thought maybe a couple of age spots, the sun might have got to him, you know. But as I turned around, and there's guys there that are in their mid-20s, early 20s, and I'm looking at them, I look around, half of them I didn't know. Most of them I knew, but some of them I didn't know. Every single one of them had little brown spots all over their arms.
You heard Kendra talk about the brown spots. First of all, I want to make it really clear, this video that's on YouTube, and you can find it on YouTube, and lots of other people are linking to it. It is important information, no doubt, and Kendra is definitely a victim of what's going on in the Gulf. But this was put out as basically new revelations of what's happening in the Gulf. It was either on New Year's Eve Day or New Year's Day, the first of this year. And I brought this point up not just to talk about how those brown spots got there, but to let you know that this really isn't new information. This came from November. In fact, the video was made in November, at the same time that we had put out an article talking about how these brown spots were showing up on everyone and what was causing it. And that's the most important. If you're on our chat, Lynn has put up the links not only for the YouTube video but also for the article. Let me give you the name of the article. You can find it on blueplague.org. Gulf Blue Plague, a lethal dose of arsenic and lies. You can also find that in World Vision Portal. So either place you want to go. Within that article, let me go catch it really quick, shows what happens with arsenic poisoning. Now, this article was back in October 10th, and I had written it because we did a test of yes, Lynn, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm reading things as I'm trying to talk. Yes, it did come out October 10th. And then the video with Kendra that you just heard part of the audio, that was sometime in November. So, I had written this because of a test that I had done and sent to a lab outside of North America to get proper results with somebody I know that's head of a large university science lab. So we came up with 731 parts per billion arsenic in the water. And this is pretty much, not too far from Tampa out in the Gulf of Mexico, which is much further southeast of where everything was going on at the time. That's not really what I want to talk about. What I had written in the article was to show the effects of what happens with arsenic in drinking water, whether it's exposure from swimming in water that has a lot of arsenic in it. And by the way, arsenic is a chemical compound. That's a natural thing. The earth has it all the time. That's why our drinking water is contaminated. Nobody's dumping barrels of arsenic in there. It's something that comes out of the earth that's normal. So, let me read some of the things that came out of that article so that you can understand what Kendra was talking about. Now, I don't know if she knows what it came from. As I said, I wrote this October 10th, and November is when the video was made that you just heard her audio part from. And this just now came out on the 1st of January of this year. So, there's a time delay in here. And I really wish that people had read what I wrote. But, okay, I'm going to re-expose it again so that everybody understands. Now, arsenic has certain effects. Besides being obviously very toxic, 0.16 parts per million of arsenic is found in Corexit, the dispersant they're using in the Gulf of Mexico. Perhaps that's a source of the arsenic that we had found in the Gulf of Mexico. Perhaps. Arsenic had been dumped into the Gulf of Mexico, like about 20,000 tons of lewisite, they call it, the dew of death, which is basically made from acetylene and an arsenic compound. It was dumped somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, and supposedly there are no military records of exactly where it was dumped. So the point of my article was to say arsenic is in the Gulf of Mexico, and yes, this can be affecting people. And that was the whole idea behind it. Now let me tie that in to what Kendra had said on the November video released right around the 1st of this year. She was talking about brown spots on those who were part of the cleanup crews. Now that could have also been those who were out with the cleanup crews out on the water in their boats, or those on the beaches or in the marshes. Cleanup crews have been everywhere. Supposedly, trying to stop the whole mess. I mean, they have been working, and they are out there being exposed to a lot of garbage. And when I had heard this on a video, she was talking about the brown spots. Well, I went bingo, because guess what one of the signs of arsenic exposure is? Brown spots or white spots on your skin. Dermal effects, they call them. Let me read part of the article. Symptoms of arsenic poisoning begin with headaches, confusion, and drowsiness. These are the same initial symptoms for those of us who experienced the Gulf Blue Plague or Gulf Blue Flu since early August. Because arsenic targets widely dispersed enzyme reactions, it affects nearly all organ systems. The most sensitive physical symptom due to arsenic exposure is dermal or skin effects. Skin lesions are common effects of heavy chronic exposure to arsenic. After continued low levels of arsenic exposure, many skin ailments appear. Besides rashes of varied appearance, hypopigmentation, which is the white spots, and hyperpigmentation, which are dark spots, are very common. And then some of the research I found out says after 10 years, skin cancers appear. After 20, 30 years, internal cancers appear as a direct result of arsenic exposure. And again, that can come in drinking water because it is in the earth, it is in the oceans, though we probably have an extra source with the oil dispersants that they were using, 0.16. Officially, anyway, they say it's 0.16 parts per million of arsenic and corrects at 9,500. We can only go by the information that they're going to release. We don't know if it's true or not. But my whole point of bringing this up about unusual white or dark coloring on the skin, which is a pigmentation, really, and also under fingernails, has really been overlooked by everyone, and I'm reading from my article from October 10th. And then now we have, Kendra talking about in November about the people with these, spots all over their arms who are working as cleanup crew on the Gulf of Mexico. Well, there you go. Put two and two together. I just wish more people would pay attention to the research that we've done and stop ignoring what are already proven scientific facts and biology facts and things like that, and go run off and on tangents. Now, I'm not talking about Kendra anymore, so we're done with that. People go off on tangents and say, well, it's the chemicals. It's the chemicals. It's the chemicals. People, it's way beyond the chemicals. The chemicals might have been a factor in mutations of microorganisms, but the chemicals are not the source. They are a factor of it. And that's what everybody has got to start to understand. It goes way beyond putting dispersant chemicals to break up the oil. That only breaks up the oil, or does, as a lot of scientists have said, a pretty bad job of breaking up the oil. It goes way past that. All right, let's talk about these birds and the fish. In the past, the first 5 days of this year, everybody's read it. Doesn't matter if you're in Europe or China. Everybody's got it on the internet. Some of the media have covered it, all about mass kill-offs of birds and fish. Arkansas, which is the Arkansas River, which is where we had the first big fish kill. Then we've got birds that died not far from that area, also within Arkansas. Okay, I want to explain. Arkansas River is connected to Mississippi River, which is connected to the Gulf. That's for all you Europeans that never spent much time in U.S. geography. All right, so there's a connection there. There's a probable deep ground connection because of natural fissures, fractures, geologically speaking, down there at 8,000, 10,000 feet below the surface, all tied to the Gulf of Mexico. You also have aquifer connections at much less depths. So let's just keep that in mind. Let me talk about why the birds were affected. You have to understand that the so-called lungs of birds, and they're not really lungs, well, they are, but they have an air sac system, which no mammal has. Basically, birds are super susceptible to anything that's in the air. And I mean anything. Let me read a little bit of the background about how birds work. As air flows through their air sac system and lungs, there's no mixing of oxygen-rich air and oxygen-poor air. For example, you and I, the way we breathe, there's a mixture. We have carbon dioxide as well as the oxygen. When we breathe in and then we breathe out, we've got a mixture. Birds are different. Right? Birds are so totally different. They have a total different system. And here's something that was really weird that I found out. The lung system, so to speak, of dinosaurs, very close to birds. So what they say is that the partial pressure of oxygen in a bird's lungs is the same as the environment around them. In other words, there is no pressure difference. So birds, because of that, have a more efficient gas exchange of both oxygen and carbon dioxide. Much more efficient than mammals or human beings. Air passes through the bird's lungs in both when they exhale and when they inhale. And then they have these air sacs that function as a reservoir for basically their next breath of air. So they're quite different and very, very, very sensitive to what is in the air. So that's the first clue. Why would the birds fall out of the sky so quick? Well, I've got some birds here. And it's basically their system is sensitive. If you turn around and I've spoken with people that have done this, people turn around and spray a very generic bug poison around their house to get rid of ants and bugs from coming in the kitchen and such, and the bird who's in the next room falls off the perch dead. It really does happen because they are so sensitive by their biology design of their lungs and such that it almost instantly hits them when they run into a poisonous gas or a virus. Of course, you've heard of bird flu and things like that. It affects them very fast. Now, birds, most of them have 9 air sacs, and this is why it affects them so fast. It's amazing. They don't breathe like you and I breathe. So do a little research on there. I don't want to get into everything about it, but I'm just trying to bring out the points that this biologically is why birds are so susceptible to gas or viruses or bacteria that are airborne. And it's not just because of their lung system, it's how the rest of their body and their entire biological system, including their major organs, reacts so quickly because of the way that they have oxygen come into their system, their lung system. I'm simplifying it. It's just, let's just call it their lung system. It's so much more than that. So they have these air sacs on top of it, and they're really very thin walls in their air sacs. And by the way, their air sacs are not like you and I with just our lungs. They basically have lungs, but they also have air sacs, and they don't breathe in. Basically, a bird is in a constant exhale system. It's a lot different than us. But these air sacs are very important because that's part of the equalization of the air pressure that I talked about at first. And you've got 9 air sacs in the average bird. And those are close, if not next to, their major organs. And they interact different than our lungs do. Because look at it this way, our lungs are more separate from the rest of our organs and serve basically the same purpose, take the oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. But with a bird, it's much more than that. And even with the dinosaurs, and they kind of became extinct. And I'm wondering, is that part of the reason they became extinct? Because they were so susceptible to what's going on in the airborne environment. So I wanted to explain that as to what might have happened in Arkansas and the birds falling out of the sky in what was it, Sweden, and all these reports all around, including Australia and New Zealand. All right. Birds are what they use in a coal mine to find out if there's any toxic gas in a coal mine, especially methane. So they're the canaries in the coal mine. And they're also a warning to us about what is going on in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, did these birds in Arkansas and around the world all at the same time fly into something like a methane gas bubble? Doubtful. And here's why it's doubtful. Starlings, certain species of starling, the red-winged starling, are the ones in Arkansas that fell out of the sky. And what was that? How many thousands and thousands? And in Tennessee and also other areas. A specific species of bird. Other birds were not affected. They didn't fall out of the sky. Now, that's got to be a heads up right there. If it was methane, then because of their lung system and their air sac system, then every species of bird would have been affected at the same time. They weren't. Now let's go to the fish. 10,000 estimated fish in the Arkansas River and thousands. Brazil, same thing, big fish kill. Chesapeake Bay on the eastern seaboard of the U.S., same thing, big fish kill. Crabs in U.K., that's right up there with the fish kill. Australia, New Zealand, same thing. As I mentioned yesterday, people notice a fish kill because we're on land and we see them wash up on the shore. We have no idea if this is going on out in the oceans, and most likely is. What we see that just comes up on shore or is evident in a bay or a cove is just a sign of what's happening out in the oceans. So all that we get to see is the small amount that end up coming up on shore. Imagine what most likely is going on out in all the oceans. Now, this is everywhere from Australia, New Zealand, Japan, fish kills, and I'm talking about the first 5 days of January. So how does that tie into the Gulf of Mexico? It ties in lots of ways. And that's what I'm going to try to get out in enough sense so that you can understand why it's tied in. There are lots of reports from yesterday afternoon to today, 6th of January, 7th of January, about this amazing thing that has happened in the Gulf of Mexico, that scientists and the government are just now letting everybody know how amazing it is that all the methane gas was eaten up by microorganisms. That's the big news for the past 24 hours. How this bacteria took fewer than 4 months to finish off all the methane in the Gulf of Mexico. And I want to tell you that is most likely true. But what I am going to tell you for sure is it is not natural bacteria, because there is no known natural bacteria that can eat up all the methane in the Gulf of Mexico. And they're putting it into perspective. Oh, that methane only, those big methane bubbles that were released because of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, which everybody saw on TV burning up, and we saw those nice little camera pictures way deep in the Gulf of Mexico about how they were trying to cap it and all that. There is a continual source of what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico when it comes to oil and methane and other gases being released. The real disaster is not the disaster you've seen on television. The real disaster is a well before the one that blew up or they blew up or whatever, whenever the Deepwater Horizon rig blew up, April 20th. Before that, they had dug at least one other well. Matt Simmons, the oil expert, had said that other well, that as far as I can figure out the best timeline, let's just say somewhere about February 13th, somewhere around that date. That well, for one reason or another, had blown off the blowout preventer and the entire well piping and everything else. Now, did they get into a fracture of the seafloor? Very, very possible. Whatever caused it, it happened. And that well is the one that we need to be concerned with. It's actually not a well anymore. It's basically an open hole into the floor of the Gulf of Mexico, whether it is a fracture or started out as a well and they hit a fracture and the darn thing split wide open. As Matt Simmons put it before he was suicided in his hot tub, as he put it, it was so powerful that it blew not only the blowout preventer and most of the well piping, but it blew it out a mile or so away from where they were drilling. So here's the scenario. And I'm going through all this because people need to understand what you have seen on television and even read on the internet is not the whole story. It really is a cover-up. Now we have the other well that was permitted, and now we're into April. In order to try to shut down the blowout, the real blowout from earlier, back in February, we have Deepwater Horizon digging another well as a relief well. Perhaps they thought they could plug the first one. They could do all that cementing and mud and all that kind of stuff that they talk about to plug it up. Maybe just get into the same reservoir to relieve the pressure, whatever. But that is the well that everybody saw on TV that blew up Deepwater Horizon rig. I'm not going to say whether it was deliberate as a cover-up or whether it was a secondary mistake. It doesn't really matter. What we are seeing in the media about the well that was dug that blew up Deepwater Horizon, or whether it was blown up some other way, it doesn't matter. That is the cover story. What we have in the Gulf of Mexico since February is a continuous flow of oil and gas, such as methane gas. And when I say continuous, just think of a nice hole that is spewing all this out and it can't stop. And there is no way to stop it. So how do you deal with that? I mean, just using common sense. How do you deal with a never-ending, or hopefully it'll end someday, but how do you deal with that much oil and gas and poisons and toxins. You got to remember, oil is actually more toxic than dispersant chemicals. Oil is very toxic. Crude oil I'm talking about, not refined oil, crude oil. So the real toxic problem is the crude oil itself and the gases that are part of that. So if you've got this continual flow, how are you going to take care of it when there's no way to plug it up? Relief wells don't work. Nothing's going to work. The old technology isn't going to apply here. Well, then we have to use new technology. And the biggest new technology, with more private companies and scientific labs working on it, both at university level all the way to government-sponsored labs, private labs, is biotechnology. Basically, synthetic biology. It is the new science and has been for over 10 years. More accurate, 20 years, but you just haven't known about it. And if you want to get into it, how about 50 to 60 years ago? All right, this is nothing new to those who have been messing with it. To be able to mess around with DNA and the RNA and duplicate viruses synthetically and things like that, this is maybe something you're hearing about now that you might think is new, but it's not new. And this has been around for a long time. That's what all the nightmare stories, I'm sure that you must have heard at one time or another in your life about what Germany, the Nazis were doing with Mengele and all these, experiments. All right, well, some of that is false and some of it is true, and it doesn't really matter. I'm bringing out the point that 1940s, early 1940s, that was going on, and it was going on before that. All right, so this is the new science. How do we get rid of all this oil? How do we get rid of all that methane gas? How can you do it when you have a continual source polluting the Gulf of Mexico? Well, you've got to come up with something that doesn't exist, or at least naturally doesn't exist. There's no known bacteria naturally that can eat up oil at the levels that the oil is being eaten up in the Gulf of Mexico. Same thing goes for the methane gas. And that's what the articles are all about right now within the past 24 hours. I'm going to read one of them, and it comes out of Christian Science Monitor. Gulf oil spill studies surprising find. Bacteria ate methane in 3 months. I see why I was trying to tell you that nothing natural can do this, and I'm going to read from different reports. You're going to find out they're giving lots of hints. They know damn well it's not natural. It's not natural bacteria. A new report is offering a potentially remarkable answer to a question that vexed scientists during the Deepwater Horizon blowout last year. And I'll add in there, it didn't vex all the scientists. Some of them knew exactly what was going on. I'll get to that article in just a minute. As oil and methane were pouring into the Gulf of Mexico from April to July, scientists sought to understand how quickly bacteria in deep Gulf waters would consume the gas. Initial rough estimates suggested that bacteria might take years. Well, actually, I've got some articles that say it would take decades. Now, that was based on Exxon Valdez tanker spill. Of course, we're talking about a much smaller amount of oil and not a steady source. It was a spill. What happened in the Gulf of Mexico is not a spill. It is a continual disaster. There's a big difference. So let's not compare apples and oranges. Article goes on to say, moreover, Moreover, because the bacteria use oxygen dissolved in seawater as they eat, there were questions about how that bacterial banquet might draw down oxygen levels. Well, I can tell you how that happened. Let me just continue with some more quotes. By the end of July and into the beginning of August, the methane decomposition rates in a broad area that this scientific team had studied were faster than had ever been recorded in any other place on the planet. Well, there's a clue. How could that happen? Faster than had ever been recorded in any other place on the planet as to how the methane was decomposing and being eaten up. Other researchers working on the same issue are cautious about these supposed results, suggesting the team may be overinterpreting its data. Well, I'm going to tell you they're not, just in the same way they're not telling you why it happened that fast. Here we go. It's a bold hypothesis, says Samantha Joye, Joye, a marine biologist at the University of Georgia at Athens in Georgia, state of Georgia, by the way, U.S., who also has been gathering methane-related measurements since the blowout on April 20th. But, quote, there are other alternate hypotheses that could just as easily explain, end quote, the data. All right, so let's move on with the article. Quoting Dr. Joy again, she says she remains unconvinced of their findings. And here's one of the reasons. The area is not well stocked with trace elements the bacteria to eat up this methane need to survive. Among them, copper, which bacteria specifically use to deal with the methane. Shortages of copper as well as other trace elements likely would have slammed the brakes on the growth of the bacteria populations needed to get rid of the methane in fewer than 4 months. I can tell you how that happened. I've already told you how it happened on previous shows and on worldvisionportal.org and on blueplague.org. Tests in August of the rain that was landing in Louisiana and Florida and Alabama. Rain tests looking for elements showed copper, iron, manganese, nickel, aluminum at higher concentrations than could possibly have naturally come out of the Gulf of Mexico. So here we have where scientists are saying, okay, we've got some kind of bacteria that's basically gobbling up the methane that's coming out of this nice big mess in the Gulf of Mexico. And scientists know darn well that with bacteria, you have to have certain elements for bacteria to survive to do their job. Now, apparently with methane-eating bacteria, at least of the natural kind, you have to have copper as well as other trace elements. And I'm quoting Dr. Joy. Well, look at my last article and the article before that, where I was showing, besides where I documented about the elements in the rainwater coming off the Gulf of Mexico, how it was essential for bacteria to eat up the oil. Well, this is a little bit different. We're talking about how specifically copper is needed, according to this scientist, Dr. Joy, to eat up with the kind of natural bacteria that would eat methane, or at least consume it one way or the other. And it's not just copper, it's other trace elements. Iron is needed for the kind of bacteria that eats up oil, hydrocarbons. So here's a big hint. she's skeptical about, and she's saying this in the article, very skeptical about their findings, saying, oh, nature just kicked in and nature is taking care of it all. Because she says, look, without extra copper and other trace elements in the water, that's not going to happen. Biologically, that won't happen, to eat up oil at that kind of a rate, or eat up methane gas. Because that's what this big announcement is about. Everybody's so proud that, whoa, nature took care of itself. It didn't. And I'll get into that. As the article says, and it was a quote, I'd be thrilled if I could sit here and tell you, yeah, the methane's all gone. Isn't that wonderful? And that's, again, quoting Dr. Joy. But 500,000 tons of methane does not get microbially consumed in 3 months. Now, she was basing that on government figures that's the amount of methane that was there. A continual source goes way beyond 500,000 tons of methane. That's why I say it's all the dog and pony show. Everything about Deepwater Horizon rig blowing up and all that, that is what they want you to focus on, and all those nice little video camera pictures from those deepwater roving vehicles that they have. They want you to see that, okay, September, we capped the well, everything's over, and now, all of a sudden, now we're finding out that somehow bacteria just came out of nowhere that has never happened before and are, eating up all the methane, and they're also saying the same thing, that it's eating up all the oil. Let me read some more. They they like to give some hints. You have to read. You don't read between the lines. You read one line from one reporter and one line from the other, so you can figure it out. This came out yesterday, and I think it was in Wall Street Journal today. But microbes, devoured methane from BP spill, study says. Right, so that's their headline. The Wall Street Journal, they're supposed to be a legitimate mainstream media paper, so we'll give them that doubt anyway. Let me read a little bit out of that article. And this, by the way, is on foxbusiness.com, quoting this soon-to-be released or has already been released Wall Street Journal article. The report stirred disbelief among several microbiologists studying the aftermath of the 87-day-old oil gas leak. Yeah, okay, it's not 87 days. It's still going on. I think they're jumping to a conclusion, said University of Georgia microbiologist Samantha Joy. Okay, she's quoted in this one too. Who has been analyzing methane from the damaged wellhead independently. In other words, she's not bought by BP. Quote, it would take a superhuman microbe to do what they are claiming. Well, Samantha Joy, you're exactly right. It is a superhuman microbe to do what they're claiming. It is not a natural microbe because, as Dr. Samantha Joy knows, that's why she's a microbiologist with the University of Georgia. She knows that there is no natural bacteria or microbe of any kind that could eat up just that amount of methane in that amount of time. So see, even though their stories are skewed, you have to look for the truth that's in them. Now, with Dr. Joy, okay, she might not be on the inside circle, which obviously she isn't because she's been studying it independently, and that's just about the damaged wellhead, all that cover-up, false story. It would take a superhuman microbe to do what they're claiming. She's right. It would. And it did. And it still is. time we get our heads out of the sand and start realizing what's going on here. And my saying is, wherever the Gulf wind blows, wherever the Gulf water flows, you're going to have effects of what's going on. And what we're talking about is not natural biology. We are talking about unnatural or synthetic biology being involved. And I've got some fantastic quotes to back that up. If I can keep my voice. Make sure you keep checking with the chat on Blog Talk Radio, because I just took a peek. Lynn is keeping us up on that with links and such. Okay, let me get into another one. Oh, in fact, I already did that one. All right. Well, I need a break because I really am starting to lose my voice, and I get excited. What can I tell you? I just have a goal to put things together for people and get truth. And by the way, as I said, we've almost finished the first hour, and I haven't even covered a tenth of what I want to cover. But I do want to open it up for call-ins, or if you're on Blog Talk Radio at /WVP and you got a question, put it in the chat room. If you call up and just want to tell Lynn that you got a question or whatever, just I want to open it up because people have got a lot of questions of what's going on and what to expect. And the only way that that I can help get more and more information is for people to ask. I spent my entire holiday season, thanks to lots of volunteers here at the Animal Sanctuary, I had time to do some even more in-depth research and talk with a lot of people, scientists and biologists and virologists. And I've got a lot more information. It's so much. Again, I'm having trouble trying to get articles out about it because I insist that everything has its references. And that takes time. And I apologize for not having all this information out there, but I want you to hear it on the radio first. Then you can go watch it in the written stuff. But anyway, just give me a break here. Part of my detox living along the Gulf is I take cell food, and I haven't had my afternoon cell food, and that helps with oxygenation and such. And also I take, by the same people who are making the cell food, I take DNA and RNA repair, and believe me, it makes such a difference. After 6 hours, when I don't have this stuff helping me, all sorts of symptoms start coming back. And by the way, for the past 2 days anyway, I've had a nice westerly wind off of the Gulf of Mexico, and lots of humidity, and lots of people aren't feeling good right now. The stuff that I take just helps amazingly. Anyway, let me just run something here for a minute, and let me go get my water and get my afternoon dose, actually evening dose of cell food to help me along here. There's I'm trying to find it, Lynn. I know you just put it up on there. Okay, this is kind of a weird song. In fact, Lynn, this is a short song, and I need more than this song. So, Lynn, go ahead and put on, after this is over, put on one of the other songs. But this is something I don't think we've ever played on here, and it's from Axe Masters, and he called it the Gulf Flu Blues, or the BP Flu Blues, or something like that. He says it in the song. It's kind of different, but I think y'all will get the idea. And if I'm not back in time, Lynn, throw on one more song.
Opportunity was knocking on my door. So I went down to make me some paper down at that seashore. They said, go pick up that shovel, go lay some boo. I spent lonely nights with my family, holed up in a little motel room. But when I got home, there was nothing I could hardly do. All dizzy, can't hardly breathe. God, Lord, I got the flu. I got the flu. Don't know what to do. Feeling all achy and swollen. It's them BP blue. Now that the work is over and all the paychecks are spent, I'd do anything to feel a little better. I feel like I'm not worth 2 cents. When I saw the beach, it was a horror. My clothes still smell from that sweet kerosene. Some say it's the worst tragedy the world has ever seen. I want to do something about it, but I'm sick of the Hudson move. Curse that oil man. I got the blue oil flu. I got the flu, mama. Don't know what else I can do. I feel all achy and swollen. I got the BT blues. They said the sand was cold. Or with oil. Opportunity was knocking at my door.
Okay, I did make it back. I made it back, Lynn. Sorry. I did faster than I thought. Anyway, yeah, isn't that an interesting song? We had picked up on that, seen it on YouTube, and asked Axe Masterson if we could use that. And that's some real heavy, deep Southern American blue style, but all about the Blue Flu Blues, the BP Blue Flu Blues. Yep, working with the oil. Anyway, Lynn, I got you on. I told you I would get sidetracked with things. So, hi, Lynn.
Hi, how you doing? I hope you didn't get me on just in time to catch the big sneeze a couple seconds ago.
Oh, no, I didn't hear it.
Okay, cool.
Anyway, there's so much info. I knew this was going to happen where I just get to the point where I don't even know where to keep on talking about anymore. So we didn't have a script for today. I just wanted to bring stuff out that we've been sharing back and forth, especially the past couple of weeks. And I got the thing with Kendra and the brown spots. We get the arsenic thing out of the way. Mm-hmm. You know what it is that I need to talk about, and I want you to chime in and prompt me because you know some of the same information. And I'm not running a script. I don't run a script for a reason, because if Spirit tells me that I need to keep on with something and explain it better, then I'll do it. So we're not following a script for a reason. Anyway, I've got a quote. If you look at some of the other articles, especially last two I've written about the cause of the Gulf Blue Plague, and it's not wise to fool Mother Nature, the one before it. I quoted a specialist with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and his name is Terry Hazen. He's a microbial biology specialist, and he's He was down in the Gulf of Mexico doing tests and such, and I've quoted him before about how we have an accelerated rate of bacteria eating up oil and things like that. I've got another quote that I found from him that I missed somehow. Now listen to this quote. Lynn, I think I sent this to you, but just in case.
Yeah, you did. Uh-huh.
Okay, it's technically, again, this is a quote, it's technically possible that we could introduce a genetic material into indigenous bugs via a bacteriophage, a virus that infects bacteria, to give local microbes DNA that would allow them to break down oil. Now, I got to repeat that because you people got to listen to what this man said. It's technically possible that we could introduce a genetic material into indigenous bugs via a bacteriophage. Let me explain what he means by that in layman's terms. He's talking about changing, introducing, or changing through introduction genetic material. Now, what's that? That's genome. That's DNA, RNA. To introduce a genetic material into indigenous bugs. What's an indigenous bug? A natural known microorganism. So he's talking about introducing genetic material into a natural known organism such as bacteria. And then he says via a bacteriophage. What that means is putting this genetic material, this introduction of a different genetic material into natural or indigenous bacteria that would exist in the Gulf. By the way, he was talking about the Gulf specifically here. Through a bacteriophage. Now, what's a bacteriophage? If you look at what was the original article with the bacteriophages? What was the name of it, Lynn? I got a blank here.
What was that the Mother Nature article?
I had mentioned it in there, but even the article where I was talking about Corexit and
the Gulf Blue Plague is evolving.
No, it was the one after that. It was part 2. Gulf Blue Plague is evolving. Corexit plus virus.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's on both the sites too. It was the second article. I talked about bacteriophages, and now I'm going to go back to it because here we've got a quote from a guy who is considered the expert when it comes to the biological breakdown of oil and the methane and everything else. He says it's technically possible we could introduce a genetic material. In other words, introduce not normal DNA or RNA into indigenous bugs, which means bacteria, through a bacteriophage. Now, a bacteriophage is a virus that infects bacteria or interchanges with bacteria. But then he goes on to say, to do that, to give local microbes DNA that would allow them to break down oil. Is everybody else getting this? This is just one small quote talking about introducing different genetic material, in other words, different DNA and RNA, into bacteria through bacteriophages, which are viruses, and for the purpose of allowing natural microbes or bacteria in the Gulf of Mexico to give them a new DNA, so to speak, that would allow them to break down oil. Now, that was a quote from Terry Hazen, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, which is a U.S. government-sponsored and paid-for lab, by the way. And this quote was from May of 2010. I missed it somehow. Let me finish the rest of what he was talking about. And this came, by the way, from National Geographic. Everybody knows the name of that outfit, and this was they published, and I've got a link to National Geographic. Stop coughing, Lynn. That's not nice.
I'm sorry.
Okay, let me finish the quote. Either that, he said, or a lab could create a completely new organism that thrives in the ocean, eats oil, and needs a certain stimulant to live. Remember we just talked about how the one scientist from the University of Georgia said in order for this superhuman, unbelievable microorganism or bacteria to eat up the methane, it would have to have copper. Well, if you look at my last article and the article before that, go to blueplague.org and read. I've laid this stuff out already, and I'm just trying to connect more dots for you to show you what these people announced to us in May about this synthetic biology or synthetically introduced biology into natural bacteria to eat up the oil and the methane. This is a quote that I just gave from back in May. Now, the article with National Geographic went on to say Hazen's team, Terry Hazen, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, government lab, by the way, Hazen's team found that microbes inside the plume samples were packed more than twice as densely as microbes outside of it. In other words, there was twice the amount of bacteria in the oil plume than there was outside of it. Even more encouraging, and I'm quoting National Geographic again, even more encouraging, the genes specifically geared to degrade hydrocarbons were more common within the plume, implying that it's not just general bacteria that are taking on this oil plume. And that quote, by the way, comes out of sciencemag.org. I'm sorry, I had it mixed up with the National Geographic one. All right, do you get the picture here? Now, please, go read what I've already written, and the last article is back from early December. It's already laid out there for you. I'm adding new quotes to back up what already is there. Start from the first article back in August and read. If you read them in succession, you're going to see everything to explain how synthetic biology, lab-created DNA genomics are involved to have superorganisms eating up methane, eating up oil. How else could they deal with what's happening in the Gulf of Mexico with a steady supply of oil and gases coming out of a fracture or a well that's blown up? Doesn't matter. It's still coming out. How are you going to deal with that? Well, nature can't deal with it. It would take decades and decades. And they all knew that after studying what happened with Exxon Valdez and other oil spills, such as in Nigeria. You don't hear about that because, Nigeria is supposed to be third world country, so you don't hear about it. It's the same thing. Now, let me explain bacteriophages. Just a little bit. And this is coming out of the Gulf Blue Plague is Evolving Part 2. Bacteriophages are viruses that change the DNA of bacteria. Many types of bacteriophages exist. And by the way, the most prevalent microorganisms in the oceans are bacteriophages. When you're talking about microbiology, the most of any microorganism known in all the oceans around the world are bacteriophages. The scientists nicknamed them phages. Right? So let me go back. Bacteriophages are viruses that change the DNA of bacteria. They literally attack bacteria. And they're viruses that attack bacteria. the most prevalent in all of the oceans, bacteriophages, are viruses. Now, don't freak out because most of the time bacteriophages are dormant viruses. But if you're going to put in some synthetic RNA and put them into the bacteriophages and then have them interject as they attack bacteria, natural bacteria that exist in all the oceans, and especially the Gulf of Mexico, is much, much warmer than the Atlantic or the Pacific. Okay, this warm ocean called the Gulf of Mexico, bacteriophages are more prevalent there than the other oceans, just because of the heat, and they attack the bacteria because we have a lot more bacteria as well. This doesn't mean necessarily that it's harmful, but when it's manipulated synthetically with computer-designed RNA, and then it's introduced into bacteria through these phages, these bacteriophages or viruses, to change the DNA of normal bacteria that exist in the Gulf. And then it's no wonder with the quotes that I just gave you how that can happen. So many types of bacteriophages exist, or phages exist. Some simply infect the host bacteria, while others insert into and alter the chromosomes of the bacteria that are there naturally. Some of the viruses donate their DNA materials to the host cell and cause alteration in the genetic code. Some bacteriophages can enter the host cell, but instead of immediately making new viral material, the bacteriophage's DNA and RNA integrate into the chromosome of the natural bacteria. So how do you get rid of all the oil, people? You don't do it by the natural bacteria or by the natural genetics of bacteria that exist in the oceans. You have to introduce somehow a change to the genetics so that they will multiply and eat the oil and the methane gases and such at an accelerated rate, and that's quoting Terry Hazen again from at least two of the previous articles that I've written. Go read them. blueplague.net. blueplague.org. Read what I've got there. Go to worldvisionportal.org. Just read what's already there. There's no sense in me doing new articles to go over the same things. That's why I'm doing it on the radio, to just wake everybody up. All right, now let's talk about the bacteria. Again, this I've already written, but I want to go over it again. Bacteria are a large group of single-cell microorganisms that grow to a fixed size and then reproduce through a form of what's called a sexual reproduction under optimal conditions, of which the Gulf of Mexico is considered one of those areas with optimal conditions. Bacteria can grow and divide rapidly, and some bacterial populations can double, people, as quickly as every 9.8 minutes. Now, I've got the references from what I was quoting in that article, in the articles. Don't just read my articles, read the references, read the links, find my reference material, and go look for yourself. I'm just putting one and one together. Most bacteria have a single cellular or circular chromosome and inherit identical copies of their parents' genes. And what that means is they basically clone themselves. All bacteria can evolve through changes made to their genetic material, DNA. And that can be caused by mutations. Now, if you have a virus such as a bacteriophage attacking a bacteria, that would be considered a mutation if the DNA of the bacteria was changed, either by the chromosomal change of the virus or bacteriophage, or RNA, which is RNA is kind of like the guidebook for what DNA becomes. But we're still all just talking about genetics. Mutations can come a couple ways. They can come from errors made during the replication of DNA or from exposure to mutating agents. And that could be chemicals or biological, such as bacteriophages or viruses. So mutations are changes in the DNA or RNA sequence of a virus. It can occur at both the gene level, called a gene mutation, and at a chromosome level, called chromosome mutation. This process is called mutagenesis. The result is a mutated virus that quickly duplicates itself, develops into maturity, and then discharges itself into the environment. A water environment discharge will become airborne due to high temperatures or as a result of storms. Now, let's back up to the beginning of this show. We were talking about the birds and the fish. It only affected specific species. Not all the birds fell out of the sky. Only specific species of birds. Not all the fish died in the Arkansas River, or all the types of crabs washed ashore and were dead in the UK, or in Australia, or in Japan, because that's what happened during the first 5 days of this year. How could that happen? Well, it can happen genetically. Now, see, the difference between species is genetic. So let's say you have a sparrow and you have a robin. They kind of look a little bit different, but they're still birds, right? If all the robins die and the sparrows live, and there is only one explanation. If it was gas, a poisonous gas, they would both die. If only one of the species of the same family dies, then it has to be genetic. So what happens in the Gulf of Mexico? We've got these synthetically altered bacteria eating gas and oil. And what happens after they eat it? What happens when these things die? What happens if they don't have enough oil in that area and their job is done? Well, then we're talking about microorganisms. They dissipate up in the air. And what happens when it gets in the air? Or what happens when the water currents bring it out into other areas? Well, these synthetic altered genes within bacteria and the bacteriophages, which are even smaller than bacteria, get into circulation through air and get into circulation through water. What will they do? Well, science tells you exactly what they'll do. They will interact with known microorganisms. And what happens? You have mutations, because it's basically combining different genes. You will have mutations. Now, chemicals also help mutations. This is what's going on. This is why it affects the whole world. And yet, everybody wants to keep their head in the sand about it, and the scientists give little hints, but they won't come out with it. Then you get people like the scientists from University of Georgia with the headlines yesterday and today about this new microorganism, this new bacteria, somehow is eating up all this all this stuff that's in the Gulf, or at least the gas anyway. That's what they were talking about. And how does that happen? As the one scientist said that I quoted, superhuman. You know, it was being sarcastic, obviously. It wasn't human. But, you know, obviously something that's not known to us. Well, where does that come from? Welcome to synthetic biology. Now, that's what's going on in the Gulf, and here's what happens because of it. it gets airborne, and it's waterborne. You have mutations because cells, all right, what is cancer? Cancer is bacteria that has taken over and created tumors. Same thing with viruses. They do the same thing. So you have microorganisms that are computer designed with their RNA to do a function, to change the DNA so that natural bacteria will be overtaken with a new genetic code to do the job that they were designed for. That's what we have in the Gulf of Mexico. It is not an introduction of completely synthetic microorganisms. No, it is the introduction through bacteriophages or viruses that are super prevalent within the oceans who naturally attack bacteria. Once you have a synthetic designed RNA virus or bacteriophage, and you let that loose in any ocean, and it gets into bacteria because it naturally attacks bacteria and takes over the DNA of the bacteria. So it's no different than exactly what J. Craig Venter came out with what they called Cynthia. He proved in a lab how that works. It was introduced into a natural bacteria through an RNA change in another way, and it was through yeast, if I can remember right. So they didn't actually create a synthetic bacteria. Instead, they genetically took over the bacteria that were natural. Now, that's exactly what has happened in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, this is not new science. It might be new to you, but it is not a new science realm. This stuff has been going on with gene splitting and recombinant genes and all this for a long time, except now we've got it where computers can design an RNA code and it can be introduced into bacteria. And then it takes over the DNA and reprograms it, is the best way to put it. Reprograms a natural bacteria to become something else. Now that is synthetic biology. That's exactly what's going on. Now what happens when they're doing their job? And even what happens, now we're talking about microorganisms. What happens when they get airborne or end up being pulled out of the Gulf of Mexico in the rain clouds, the natural way that rain clouds are formed? And then those rain clouds have pulled these bacteriophages and these microorganisms, these bacteria as well. They're up in the rain, which normally happens. That's how nature does it. But we're talking about sucking out the synthetic, altered microorganisms. What happens when that rain cloud goes to land? What happens when those new synthetic guided microorganisms with their new genetics, what happens when they land on somebody's skin? Well, all of a sudden, let's put it this way. One of the things that's hitting all the people in the Gulf of Mexico, not everybody, but enough, is new types of flesh-eating bacteria. New species of it, so to speak. Never seen before. And nobody knows how to stop it. How can that come about? I just explained the whole scenario, exactly how it came about. What happens when natural bacterium on land and in the air, because we have bacteria in the air as well, what happens when all these synthetic coded microorganisms attack or mutate or join with other natural microorganisms on land and in the air? What will happen? new flesh-eating bacteria just might be one of them. New lesions that nobody can explain. And here's the thing that just gets me. They always blame it on Corexit. People, Corexit is only a factor in the equation. It is not the cause of what's going on biologically. It's only, perhaps, could be one of the factors of mutation. And as well, with some of the chemicals, break down the oil. But it is not the cause of what's going on biologically with everybody. Now, how do you explain the birds falling out of the air? Genetically, if you have mutations and a specific species is susceptible to a certain type of mutated virus or bacteria in the air, because their DNA is unique enough that when the two combine, the synthetic guided as well as the natural, they're going to fall out of the air. Same thing happens with fish. Again, only drumfish in the Arkansas River are the ones that died. The other fish were not affected. How does that happen? Only by specific biology. And that includes viral as well as bacterial. It's time to think, people. Time to use some common sense. I've got the references on the site. Start looking them up. Start reading. Start learning. Start being aware. This is what's coming down the road. The first effects happen to those of us in the Gulf of Mexico. The rest of the world perhaps is already getting it. I really question all the swine flu and bird flu as of late. Right now in the UK, we've got code red, code black in hospitals because their isolation units from the flu, new species of the flu, cannot handle all the patients that they've got. They're at capacity already. Now that's in the UK. How could they get that in the UK? Easy. Guess where the jet stream has been blowing from for months, and still is right now today. The upper atmosphere jet stream has been blowing across the Gulf of Mexico and heading towards Europe for months. Does that explain these new species and varieties of unknown flus? Well, I can't think of anything that could explain it better, can you? Because we're talking about messing with biology in the Gulf of Mexico. And wherever the wind's going to blow, aren't you going to get it too? What happens when that biology, that synthetic introduced biology and genetics, meets with natural biology in other countries that might not be found in the Gulf of Mexico? What happens when the two combine? Are we going to have some odd mutations? Are we going to have the Black Plague all over again? Well, that's why I call this the Blue Plague. It's not just the flu, people. And I've been saying this since July, and I've been writing about it since August, and we started with Blog Talk Radio in August. And I'm not, trying to say, look, people, I've already told you all this, but I have. And I've spelled it out for you. And it's up to you to go read what I've already written and listen to the broadcast I've already made about this. I've even shown you how to overcome the DNA changes. Well, I haven't shown you. I didn't write about that yet. But I did mention it on how to detox back in the early stages in August when I was having so many effects. And that's where I talk about the cell food. And they also have something they put out that's DNA and RNA repair. And you know what? It works. So I'm trying to forewarn everybody else outside the Gulf of Mexico. Look, this is coming your way if it's not there already. And scientifically, I've given you the facts to prove that. And even worse, we have so many unknown factors involved. We have synthetic guided genetics in microorganisms that will, by nature, combine with other microorganisms. And what will be the result? Nobody knows. Will it just affect certain DNA? Yes. Could it affect all DNA? I don't know. Depends what they've done. But by the results and by their own admission, they've messed around with RNA and DNA, the genetics, to try to eat up oil and to try to eat up things like methane gas. Now here today we have all the headlines about it. The only way that happens is using synthetic biology. No known microorganisms can do what is happening in the Gulf right now. And we've got the symptoms, and I say we, that's people who live along the Gulf of Mexico, like I do. There are so many so sick, and you're not hearing about it. And detox from chemicals is not the only thing that needs to be done. There has to be DNA repair. There has to be RNA repair. Now, there's ways to do that. And this is what I'm really looking into. I'm looking into the old solfeggio chords, ancient music frequencies. The Gregorian chants are the same thing. They come from that. 528 megahertz is known, even by scientists, to heal DNA. I'm practicing that myself. I want to find the answers to combat what's going on. Harmonics are very, very, very important. That's what all this science on the other end is doing with scalar weapons and such within a vacuum, and weather control with electromagnetics. And I know lots of people are hearing a high tone that you've never heard before. Huh. And a lot of you are hearing a hum you've never heard before. Well, that is, again, part of the equation. And I'm sure that has to do with manipulation of the synthetic guided microorganisms. And if I'm wrong, then fine. Somebody prove me wrong. You know, I would really love for somebody to prove me wrong about the synthetic genes in microorganisms in the Gulf of Mexico. I would love for somebody to prove me wrong, because then that means that everything that I'm finding out would be wrong. And then I wouldn't have any worries, and neither would you. But I've already put the challenge out to scientists months ago. I've got it on YouTube. I put it on Blog Talk Radio. Please prove me wrong. Show me that synthetic genes have not been introduced to the Gulf of Mexico. And nobody has stepped forward to say I'm wrong. Now, wouldn't you say that's a pretty big challenge? I'm not a scientist. It should be really easy to prove me wrong, shouldn't it, if you got a PhD? Should be really easy to prove me wrong. I'm just a Joe Blow guy who has an animal sanctuary and does rehab on injured animals and has some horses that are rescued. And I'm just the caretaker here, but I do everything natural, organic, and study to find out the needs of animals that need to be naturally healed. I have a great track record, but I am not a scientist. I don't have a fancy degree. I don't have a PhD. I don't have a master's degree. I have a bachelor's degree, but that's all right. It's not in this field. Actually, it's a degree in divinity. And maybe that's what all the guiding comes from. Maybe this, everything that I'm finding out is because maybe God's showing me the way. But I challenge everybody, prove me wrong. If you can prove me wrong, then that means we don't have to go down that road. But the problem is nobody has stepped forward to prove me wrong. While I'm at it, I want to get into other things that's happening around the Gulf of Mexico. I want to get into the groups who claim that they are helping the Gulf of Mexico, who are not out there to help victims and residents and people who live along the Gulf of Mexico. They're established for their own purposes, for their own agenda, and part of that is to victimize people along the Gulf of Mexico. So, just because they put on there the name, the Gulf something or whatever, check out exactly what they say and check out their agenda. Make sure they really are helping. Now, there are really outstanding, legitimate groups, especially some physician groups and such, who are trying really hard to help people along the Gulf of Mexico. But then there are those who, for their own reasons, have really nice internet forums and sites and such, and some of them are attorneys who are taking cases against BP. And what better way to advertise your services than have a forum on the internet about all things happening with the Gulf? See, I just get a little tired of all the games and the different agendas. Nobody's paying me to go ahead and find out whatever I can, like I did about BP's connection with Synthetic Genomics Incorporated, or with J. Craig Ventnor at JCVI Institute. Nobody's paying me to find this out. I'm finding it out because I live here. This is where my home is, and I'm not leaving. I'm staying here. These are my beaches. These are my neighbors' beaches. The Gulf of Mexico is ours. We've eaten the shrimp out of there. Now we can't eat anything. In fact, please don't eat anything out of the Gulf of Mexico. Please. No matter what group or especially government tells you it's okay, I'll guarantee you they are not serving Gulf shrimp at the White House, okay? We got some big, big, big problems, and it's not just staying here. I'm sending out a warning to everybody around the world. That's why Fridays at 4 Eastern Time in the Americas, I'm going to continue with these broadcasts in 2 hours. I have got a lot more information. But yeah, I'm standing on my soapbox right now because I'm trying to get across to everybody, do not believe the lies you're being told, whether it's the government or BP or certain groups that have an agenda who say they're representing the Gulf when behind the scenes they're not. All right, so open your eyes and realize this is a worldwide problem. I have been saying that since August. I am so glad that Kendra said it on this November tape that they released on January 1st. That's not new revelation material. She had said it in November, but okay, the group that put it out, they're, grandstanding, I guess. They want to say, oh, it's all new stuff. Kendra's a victim. I feel she's being victimized not only by what happened in the Gulf, but by those who are using her. And that's as far as I'll go with that. I'm not naming names. Go figure it out for yourself. That's part of the reason as why those groups with an agenda that is not to help people on the Gulf, but who claim they are, why they don't want anything to do with me and other people who are making an effort and coming up with results to let people know what's really going on. All right, let me mention John Hutchison and Nancy Luzerne. they're still here in the Gulf, and they're still doing their frequency tests, and they have positive results. They've not only done it in the water, but because of what they've done with water testing, it has also affected people that have been around where they're doing their testing. Now, this is just using frequencies and harmonics. And one of them is what I mentioned before, the old ancient Suffragio scale that is no longer used. Modern music doesn't use that scale anymore. I believe, if I can remember correctly, 528 megahertz is middle note C, or what they call C5. Well, now I believe it's at 414 megahertz. So things are not, even with music, at the healing harmonics that they were before. And John Hutchison is proving this. And he's proving it where the water clears up when he's using the proper frequencies. And people around them keep coming to when they're doing the test because they say it makes them feel better. Well, apparently, because we know that harmonics and frequencies are healers as well as destroyers of DNA in all beings, animals, trees, everything. Apparently what they're doing is healing. But yet they're shunned by all the not all, okay, I don't want to say this wrong, by some of the more well-known groups that are supposed to be representing the Gulf. They refuse to represent me and some of the articles, especially the last 2 articles I've written, and they won't give the time of day to John Hutchinson's results and his experiments. And you know what? Nobody's really paying John. They sleep in the truck most of the time. We're in their trailer with all the equipment. They're not sitting in a fancy motel. I just wanted to get all this out. It's been bugging me for a while, and I just want people to know what's going on. People are not just being victimized along the Gulf of Mexico, they're being exploited. And then those who are doing a job and trying to get answers are being basically blacklisted and shunned. And that's what's going on here. So, well, I had knocked Lynn off before. I'm going to have her come back on. All right, Lynn, I finished my soapbox. Anything else that I need to cover?
No, I think that's pretty much everything that we had talked about earlier. I can't find my list now. I don't know what I did with it. I've been working on other things during the show as usual. So I listen. I get clear enough with tying of how can birds fall out of the fly in Arkansas and around the world, and fish kills and all this. You think we covered the biology standpoint anyway, involving the synthetics? Synthetic. Absolutely. And like Michael said, I encourage everyone to go to the websites and read up if you haven't done so already, because there's a lot of good information there, and we're going to be putting more information out over the next months, and it's important to have a background so you'll be able to understand the new information as it comes out. Yeah, all that information that I've just got overload, and that's part of my problem is I've been looking at so much. I just got overload. There's so much in there. I guess it would have been easier if I really was a degreed scientist, because then I would have had this stuff in me already. But I'm learning all this as I go along, and this is like going back to college. Michael, if we were degreed scientists, we'd be bought and paid for, and we wouldn't be able to say and do the things that we do. So, well, at least we know one who isn't, the lady I quoted from the University of Georgia. That's refreshing. That's true. Yeah.
She must not be grant dependent, so
Apparently not.
either that or she just blew her career.
Or maybe BP stopped with her grant there this year, so I guess
I don't know.
After her statement.
It's a little discouraging, people, to see how things are being run and, you know, how people are being controlled and what they say and do. And but it you know, there are times when we're going through these articles and we find these little quotes, and it's like, well, are they slipping up when they say that, or are they speaking in a sort of code hoping that somebody will understand it? So
well, I think it's code. I think it's code, but they don't want to be caught later on to say that they lied. So they do put truth in there, and then they say, well, we revealed it. You know, and I forgot the BP video. I forgot to mention that.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah, you got to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Blueplague.org and worldvisionportal.org. Go ahead and look at blueplague.org. Oh, excuse me, right now. If you're still live with us and you're hearing this in the archives, go look there right now, blueplague.org. The first front page, because it's the last thing that was put up, was about how a BP official admitted to the BBC that they were using a new type of microbiology to deal with this oil spill. Go read it for yourself and go listen to what he said, and then how, as soon as he said it, they cut him off and the interview was over. And it's only 17 seconds. Surely you can spare that. Now, here's what I found out today. Because I've got somebody doing some reverse speech analysis of what's some of the statements going on in the Gulf of Mexico. So I wanted to get that full, I believe it's like a 9-minute clip that came from BBC. I went on there today, and the link is on the site, by the way, right where I have the 17-second video snip. Go to the BP link that's on there, not BP, I'm sorry, BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation. Go to that link that's there. And wherever you are in the world, click it and send us an email or put a comment right there on blueplague.org with that article. Put a comment of whether you can see the original video or not from BBC. I know in the UK you can still see it. Already checked on that. And in Germany you can still see it. So far, I've got, let's see now, and I'm looking at my emails. Looks like 5 of people around North America, one is Canadian, that cannot see the original BBC clip that they have published in the UK. So apparently they're blacking it out. Not they are. I'm sure they were told to black it out. BBC is government-owned, so that's not a far stretch. Cannot be seen. The whole interview can no longer be seen in North America as far as we can figure out now. If you can see it and you're in North America, put a comment on there that you clicked the link and it came up and you could see the whole entire BBC interview. Because I know it's been blocked almost all today since we started it. So there's your challenge for the week. I'm going to be trying to get other programs in just besides on Fridays, but surely Fridays at 4 Eastern in the States is going to be for the Blue Plague only. Trying to get Robert Phoenix to commit to a weekly show where he and I co-host it, and it'll either be on his BTR Blog Talk Radio show, or be on mine, or maybe we'll go back and forth. But Robert and I really together. What would you call it, Lynn? Something goes on when he and I have done shows together, and the one yesterday and on December 30th they were just unbelievable. What would you call it?
There's really great energy. Yeah, no, it's good energy. It's just really good energy with you two, and I think your minds work at the same speed. So, I mean, neither one of you ever misses a beat, and it's just fascinating to listen to. So.
Yeah, even I listened to yesterday's show this morning. I was like, wow, he would say one thing. Of course, he was a guest, and he gets the microphone all he wants. And then I just couldn't help it. Some things I just had to throw in there, and then he'd just counter right back and talk about flowing. And this has happened every had shows. So there's some good energy going on between Robert and and I hope we can continue that to have a weekly show. And I'm trying to convince Robert to do that. It doesn't just have to be about astrology. Robert has insights into what's going on in the world the same way that I do with things. We just don't see the mainstream media excuses. We just go right past it, and that's what people need to hear. They need to see what the bottom line is. And
people need to hear the truth. So
that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Both of those interviews have been posted on YouTube now. So if you go to our channel at youtube.com/WVPRadio, you'll be able to see. I've put them into a playlist, and it's just a picture of Robert in a cowboy hat. I think it's actually a needlepoint that somebody did for him, and he took a picture of it. But you can listen to Robert and Michael on those, in addition to on our BTR channel and the archives at the WVP or World Vision portal. So
yeah, we got it on blogtalkradio.com/WVP. In fact, he's I believe you still have that as the featured from yesterday. There's some good energy between Robert and I, so like I said, trying to encourage him to, whether I'm on his channel one day a week, and then the next week he's on mine or whatever, but we get a lot covered, and that's what's really important, and it's not the typical talk show host, let's go read the headlines and see what's going on. He and I, just together, it seems like we have some melded insights that just come out when we're talking together that neither one of us really come out with all that information alone. That's the best way I can describe it. But anyway, if you know Robert, encourage him. If you think he and I would make a good team, I would love to co-host with him. I don't want to be the host, I want to co-host. Because I just think our energy is too fantastic not to do it. So if you know Robert, I know a lot of you that listen here also listen to Robert every day. Encourage him. I think it would be great. If you agree, let him know. Let me know. Anyway, we're almost done for this broadcast, and we're going to start filling in during the weekdays with other hosts, and some that were supposed to work out didn't. And things will come when they're supposed to. So we appreciate you listening in. Please be who you were created to be. Think about that. Think about it real hard. Be who you were created to be. And above all, love one another. So until next show, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for being here. And we'll see you on the radio. Further southeast of where everything was going on at the time. That's not really what I want to talk about. What I had written in the article was to show the effects of what happens with arsenic in drinking water, whether it's exposure from swimming in water that has a lot of arsenic in it. And by the way, arsenic is a chemical compound. That's a natural thing. The earth has it all the time. That's why our drinking water is contaminated. Nobody's dumping barrels of arsenic in there. It's something that comes out of the earth that's normal. So, let me read some of the things that came out of that article so that you can understand what Kendra was talking about. Now, I don't know if she knows what it came from. As I said, I wrote this October 10th. And November is when the video was made that you just heard her audio part from. And this just now came out on the 1st of January of this year. So, there's a time delay in here. And I really wish that people had read what I wrote. But, okay, I'm going to re-expose it again so that everybody understands. Now, arsenic has certain effects. Besides being obviously very toxic, 0.16 parts per million of arsenic is found in Corexit, the dispersant they're using in the Gulf of Mexico. Perhaps that's a source of the arsenic that we had found in the Gulf of Mexico. Perhaps. Arsenic had been dumped into the Gulf of Mexico, like about 20,000 tons of lewisite, they call it, the dew of death, which is basically made from acetylene and an arsenic compound. It was dumped somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, and supposedly there are no military records of exactly where it was dumped. So the point of my article was to say arsenic is in the Gulf of Mexico, and yes, this can be affecting people. And that was the whole idea behind it. Now let me tie that in to what Kendra had said on the November video released right around the 1st of this year. She was talking about brown spots on those who were part of the cleanup crews. Now that could have also been those who were out with the cleanup crews out on the water in their boats, or those on the beaches or in the marshes. Cleanup crews have been everywhere. Supposedly, trying to stop the whole mess. I mean, they have been working, and they are out there being exposed to a lot. All right, so now we get into the Gulf Blue Plague. And if you look on the description with today, this subject is Canaries in the Coal Mine, Gulf Blue Plague Warnings. And that's an article that I have been working on. It's the same title, Canaries in the Coal Mine, Gulf Blue Plague Warnings. I've been working on this for over 2 weeks, and it's just so much. I can't finish it. It's going to end up being multiple articles all over again. And maybe the timing is off. Other people have come out with other things going on with the Gulf, and I'll cover that first today. Let me start off with what came out on New Year's Day, or maybe it was New Year's Eve Day. Can't remember, but a certain group who claim that they're representing those of us in the Gulf came out with a video, and it's really gone ballistic. And it had one of the Gulf victims in Louisiana, somebody who is getting well known and has even been on mainstream or lamestream media, television and such, Kendra Arneson. And I want to play for you just a little bit of what she said during that video, because it ties in with what we had written before. And Lynn, go ahead and post the arsenic article on the chat room so people can see what I'm referring to. So let me play this partial audio out of the video clip that went ballistic. Last time I looked, it was like 48 or 50,000 hits, and that was yesterday. So, and it was supposed to be, by the way, about new information of what's going on with the Gulf of Mexico. Well, I'll discuss more of that. Go ahead and listen to this partial from that video. Listen to this audio of what she is talking about.
I've seen some of the cleanup workers down in Venice a couple of days ago. They had a rain-out day, so they were all at the local store. They'd been working about a month straight, having a couple of beers, a bunch of guys, you know. And I went over there to get my oil changed, so I walked inside to talk to my neighborhood guys, you know, I know all of them, and Mr. Hart that owns the store. And a friend of mine said, "Kendra, look at my arms." And he was laughing about it because people trust the government and think that everything's okay. He's got brown spots all over his arms. So I thought, well, you know, I've never seen that before. And then as I turned around and I started looking, now my friend is in his mid-40s. So I thought maybe a couple of age spots, the sun might have got to him, you know. But as I turned around,
even scientific facts and biology facts and things like that, and go run off and on tangents. Now, I'm not talking about Kendra anymore, so we're done with that. People go off on tangents and say, well, it's the chemicals. It's the chemicals. It's the chemicals. People, it's way beyond the chemicals. The chemicals might have been a factor in mutations of microorganisms, but the chemicals are not the source. They are a factor of it. And that's what everybody has got to start to understand. It goes way beyond putting dispersant chemicals to break up the oil. That only breaks up the oil, or does, as a lot of scientists have said, a pretty bad job of breaking up the oil. It goes way past that. All right, let's talk about these birds and the fish. In the past, the first 5 days of this year, everybody's read it. Doesn't matter if you're in Europe or China. Everybody's got it on the internet. Some of the media have covered it, all about mass kill-offs of birds and fish. Arkansas, which is the Arkansas River, which is where we had the first big fish kill. Then we've got birds that died not far from that area, also within Arkansas. Okay, I want to explain. Arkansas River is connected to Mississippi River, which is connected to the Gulf. That's for all you Europeans that never spent much time in U.S. geography. All right, so there's a connection there. There's a probable deep ground connection because of natural fissures, fractures, geologically speaking, down there at 8,000, 10,000 feet below the surface, all tied to the Gulf of Mexico. You also have aquifer connections at much less depths. So let's just keep that in mind. Let me talk about why the birds were affected. You have to understand that the so-called lungs of birds, and they're not really lungs, well, they are, but they have an air sac system, which no mammal has. Basically, birds are super susceptible to anything that's in the air. And I mean anything. Let me read a little bit of the background about how birds work. As air flows through their air sac system and lungs.
And there's guys there that are in their mid-20s, early 20s, and I'm looking at them. I look around. Half of them I didn't know. Most of them I knew, but some of them I didn't know. Every single one of them had little brown spots all over their arms.
You heard Kendra talk about the brown spots. First of all, I want to make it really clear. This video that's on YouTube, and you can find it on YouTube, and lots of other people are linking to it. It is important information, no doubt, and Kendra is definitely a victim of what's going on in the Gulf. But this was put out as basically new revelations of what's happening in the Gulf. It was either on New Year's Eve day or New Year's Day, the first of this year. And I brought this point up not just to talk about how those brown spots got there, but to let you know that this really isn't new information. This came from November. In fact, the video was made in November. At the same time that we had put out an article talking about how these brown spots were showing up on everyone and what was causing it, and that's the most important. If you're on our chat, Lynn has put up the links not only for the YouTube video but also for the article. Let me give you the name of the article. You can find it on blueplague.org. Gulf Blue Plague, a lethal dose of arsenic and lies. You can also find that in World Vision Portal. So either place you want to go. Within that article,
let me go catch it really quick, shows what happens with arsenic poisoning. Now, this article was back in October 10th, and I had written it because we did a test of yes, Lynn, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm reading things as I'm trying to talk. Yes, it did come out October 10th. And then the video with Kendra that you just heard part of the audio, that was sometime in November. So, I had written this because of a test that I had done and sent to a lab outside of North America to get proper results with somebody I know that's head of a large university science lab. So we came up with 731 parts per billion arsenic in the water. And this is pretty much, not too far from Tampa out in the Gulf of Mexico, which is much like garbage. And when I had heard this on a video, she was talking about the brown spots. Well, I went bingo, because guess what one of the signs of arsenic exposure is? Brown spots or white spots on your skin. Dermal effects, they call them. Let me read part of the article. Symptoms of arsenic poisoning begin with headaches, confusion, and drowsiness. These are the same initial symptoms for those of us who experienced the Gulf Blue Plague or Gulf Blue Flu since early August. Because arsenic targets widely dispersed enzyme reactions, it affects nearly all organ systems. The most sensitive physical symptom due to arsenic exposure is dermal or skin effects. Skin lesions are common effects of heavy chronic exposure to arsenic. After continued low levels of arsenic exposure, many skin ailments appear. Besides rashes of varied appearance, hypopigmentation, which is the white spots, and hyperpigmentation, which are dark spots, are very common. And then some of the research I found out says after 10 years, skin cancers appear. After 20, 30 years, internal cancers appear as a direct result of arsenic exposure. And again, that can come in drinking water because it is in the earth, it is in the oceans, though we probably have an extra source with the oil dispersants that they were using, 0.16, officially anyway, they say is 0.16 parts per million of arsenic and corrects at 9,500. We can only go by the information that they're going to release. We don't know if it's true or not. But my whole point of bringing this up about unusual white or dark coloring on the skin, which is a pigmentation, really, and also under fingernails, has really been overlooked by everyone. And I'm reading from my article from October 10th. And then now we have, Kendra talking about in November about the people with these, spots all over their arms who are working as cleanup crew on the Gulf of Mexico. Well, there you go. Put two and two together. I just wish more people would pay attention to the research that we've done and stop ignoring what are already proved